Okay, let's try that again. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Zalando's satellite event for Tech Open Air. We're really excited to have you here today, and it's not too hot, right? You're all surviving, you have ice cream, it's all good. I'm your host this evening. My name is Stacia Carr, and I'm the head of engineering and dedicated owner for the sizing topic at Zalando, and I have the privilege of sharing this panel with 5 wonderful folks. I'd like to invite them out on stage now. We're going to talk about personalization and make this very interesting for you. Personalization is quite a hot topic in the world, in tech certainly, and we're going to take a look at it from a few different points of view. All right, fabulous. So, without further ado, I'm going to start with introductions from the opposite side. Scott Weiss, VP Product Design here in Berlin at Babble. We have Nils Heuer, Nils has been around the block. He's now working out of Google, and your official title is?
I am a customer engineer.
Fabulous. Yep. John Cooke, who joins us from Databricks.
Yes, so hi, everyone. Yes, I'm John Cooke. I'm the solution designer for tech lead for EMEA for Databricks.
And Matteo Gamba, coming to us from Wayfair, where he is a senior product designer or product development manager. And also from Zalando, Carlqvist, our senior business developer who focuses on personalization here at Zalando. What we've decided to do to open up the discussion is rather than focus on who we are and our CVs, is actually to start out with what we refer to as an opening salvo. So we all work with personalization in different contexts. We have different questions that we grapple with every day, different aspirations in terms of value that we want to create for our customers and our clients. And big topics that we grapple with. So I'd like to, maybe I go from the middle. John, coming from the Databricks perspective, what are some of the most exciting things around personalization that Databricks enables for customers?
Sure,
we start with aspiration.
Sure, absolutely. And we work obviously with a lot of clients building personalization across the retail and fashion and also the ad tech world. So building things like recommendation engines, really sort of deep profiling for customer journeys, and actually making that really impersonal experience by using AI and ML on big data, so we can have massive amounts of personalization on using the data driving those insights.
Fabulous. And Matteo, coming from the consumer space and consumer payment space, what are some of the kind of big questions that you and your team grapple with when you think about localization and personalization?
Yeah, so definitely I think also given the topic of the conversation here, I think for us it's interesting to do a step back and to look at personalization from more of a macro environment and really think about localization as a part of personalization, really making sure that we can deliver a very good experience for different customer segments, and starting from a very macro level at the country, from the country side, and then defining customer groups, and still understanding how the product can change because of the specific needs these people have. And that's something that often people forget, and they jump into the micro and to the user specifics, but we really think that's where you have to start from.
So starting from the macro and then zooming back down.
Yeah.
Caroline, coming from the fashion e-commerce space, any provocations you want to share with us before we get into it?
Well, fashion, that's what we do here at Zalando, and one of the challenges and something that I personally hope that we can actually solve with personalization is how to how to remove bias in this kind of shopping journey for fashion, and how we can truly allow people to unleash their very personal style. If I just take 2 examples, I have size 38 feet, which means that I don't actually care if someone decided that these shoes are for kids, because if they fit me, I want to buy them if I like them. Or, another example, I like men's clothes. Why can't I be recommended men's clothes, and why is it so difficult for me as a woman to actually get to that assortment? So really, how can we leverage technology to remove bias and really unleash everyone's personal style?
Fabulous. Okay, Nils, coming from quite a different perspective. Yeah, what are some of the sort of very interesting or very challenging things that you have an opportunity to see, given that you're working out of Google, formerly Amazon, so you work with other businesses that are building personalization as part of their strategy. Yeah, what's top of mind for you?
So for me, just as a background story, there's a super corny science fiction movie called Stargate. It's really old. I'm showing my age here.
I've seen it.
Yes. And when Kurt Russell's character was introduced, they're asking him why he's there. And he says, I'm here in case you succeed. And this is kind of what we do at Google, because yes, we've done a lot of these exercises ourselves. We just call it data, because big data is really not something we talk about. And for the technology people, just to put it into perspective and context, like we stopped using Hadoop because and giving you being successful data and having to manage it at scale, I think we've done a lot of the mistakes and lessons learned for you. We now offer these to our customers. But think about it, like in a scenario like Zalando, you probably have a couple 100,000 inventory items, a couple millions of variations. You have a huge customer base, and taking all that data into account, you have to give a recommendation in less than 100 milliseconds. So this is kind of the challenge we try to help our customers with, and this is what I do for a living, which is super exciting.
Fabulous. And Scott, last but not least, yeah, what makes you excited about bringing personalization into a learning platform like Babble? What's the opportunity, and maybe what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
So I'll start with the opportunity. So the opportunity is Babble has thousands of lessons in 14 different learning languages, 7 display languages, and that can be intimidating for people. And not everybody wants to start with beginner's course 1, lesson 1. So
Right.
what we want to create in more than we have today so far is to create a personalized learning journey, so that when somebody comes to the product, we ask them some questions about them, and then we
There we go.
All right.
Okay. I promise I won't do that again.
Wow.
Where was I? So I was saying, we want to create a more personalized learning journey for each Babble learner. That's one thing. But what keeps me up at night is how we can create an adaptive learning experience, so that when someone's in the middle of a lesson, that if it's too hard, we can make it easier. If it's too easy, we can make it a little bit harder to get it just right. That's something that I think about a lot.
I think that's a common a common struggle that we all have, especially for those of us that are focused on building personalized experiences for consumers, because we know how much, if you get it wrong, it can really be a turnoff. So let's start out with that. So maybe for those of us focused on providing personalized experiences for consumers, like, let's talk about tales from the battlefield. Like, are there any big mistakes? Because I think we have, how many people in the audience are currently working at a startup? Okay, so at least 3/4. And of you, how many of you have like a personalization strategy within the startup that you're working at? Right, so you guys want to learn from us. Don't make the mistakes that we have. So yeah, does anybody want to start with maybe Caroline? Is there something from the fashion space?
Well, from the fashion space, it's really like to kind of get this 360 view of the customer, because when we, of course, data, that's the core of all of this. But how do we weigh this data? Is it only the things that I recently clicked and looked at? Yeah, maybe I looked at it because I thought it was ugly. So maybe that's not something that I actually am interested in, but that I looked at it because, ew, can it really look like that? So really to be able to also kind of distinguish why is this customer doing this, like to really understand the behavior, because if we only look at clicks and so on, we're never going to get the full understanding of the customer. Or maybe they're not even shopping for themselves, maybe they're actually shopping for someone else. So to really try to get a 360 view of our customers, and I mean that's super fuzzy answer, but really it's important, because if we only just stare ourselves blind at the most recent data, we're never going to get it right.
I think that's really important, because we see a lot of that when we have customers building machine learning models, and how many people in the room understand the discipline, but there's a lot of experiences where the data has basically given completely wrong results from things like chatbots. We all know a certain chatbot that started being a racist and that type of stuff on the web, but also you have to looking at things like bias and overfitting and skew. So basically, when you've got a data set that's telling you something particularly that's erroneous and you don't know, that's something that's very, very prevalent in machine learning, and that's a real gotcha in that space.
Matteo, you're focused on payments in particular, and we talked a little bit earlier about payment processing is it can be quite a sensitive topic, both from a point of view of the data security perspective, but also in terms of risk and fraud management. So are there really any interesting lessons learned, whether it's from Wayfair or maybe just within the online payment space, that has helped inform your decision-making process?
So definitely in payments, personalization performance is a big part. Also there at the macro level, you can definitely see how different countries behave in a different way. People from different countries, Germans, they don't like credit cards. Americans, they do. That's just something that you have to take for granted. And that's also something that you have to factor in when you decide how are we going to consider fraud, because different payment methods are going to have different fraud patterns. And that's also the kind of logic that you have to adapt. And that's not always obvious. That's the kind of stuff that you often have to discover by doing. Unfortunately, that's the way it kind of works with fraud. Unless you've been there, you have to experience it on your own skin. And I think there are interesting patterns that you can see in the industry, depending on the time of the day or the type of behavior that you had on site. You might want to decide to display a specific payment method or not, that is more risky at a given point in time for a given type of basket. And you might want to offer only something that is really reducing the fraud risk at that point. So definitely there is a component to take into account.
So this theme of not all customers should be treated equally when it comes to a personalized experience, because we know that different countries and cultures have different patterns of behavior. So let's think a little bit let's zoom out a little bit, and going back to the folks in the audience here, what are some of the best practices to John and Nils that you've seen adopted by early stage startups who are interested in personalization but have limited resources, but have a good use case, have something important that they can offer to customers? What are some of the best known practices that you've seen to date?
Sure, sure. So I think from our perspective, what we see works really well is start small, start simple, start with a kind of a known sort of objective, use cloud infrastructure to be able to actually do that, to test out your experiments, test out kind of your hypotheses, and fail fast. Especially in the AI and big data world, what you want to be able to do is actually 9 times out of 10 you're going to get it wrong, but that's good. That's all part of the learning. I've seen some companies build big sort of data lakes where they put the data into a centralized place before really working out what they're going to do with it, and they spend a lot of money doing that, and then they can't get the insight they need from it. So again, I would start small and actually try and get the insight very, very quickly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the cloud part.
That's okay.
But in general, we had a little disagreement on that earlier while thinking, yes, it doesn't make sense to just blindly collect data, especially without consent in the age of GDPR.
We'll get to that later.
One of the nice things is that like storing lots of data has become super cheap. So even if at this point you don't know what kind of scenarios will come your way, don't be afraid to just keep stuff. That's the one thing to take away. If I can make one point is like don't delete anything you might think is worthless right now, because at some point it will probably come back to haunt you where you say, oh, if only we had kept that data. That being said, going back to John's point, don't be afraid to experiment. Also do maybe some more off-angle experiments. It's something with a company down the road from here where they actually had their data scientists work on data where nobody knew what the data was. So they came up with some interesting scenarios there, but it certainly helped them to get more comfortable and familiar with it. In the point of collecting data, you're not collecting enough data points probably to work or create your own machine learning models in most cases as you get started. So don't be afraid to, again, leverage existing models that are available as APIs to you. Anything from like vision, audio, translation. If you look at the marketplace, what you're trying to achieve, there's probably an API for that, and don't be afraid to use that as a starting point. Nobody's going to steal your idea just because they offer something that is leveraging or taking away some of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that you would have to do otherwise.
Do you think it's actually realistic to expect the company to start collecting data without knowing what they're going to be using them for? Because it's an easy advice to say just collect data, but then are you actually going to know what kind of interactions you want to get and what are you going to do with it? And are you going to spend the time and the money to go through that process?
Good point. So I think the driver for it should be like what's the why of your company? Like what are you trying to achieve? Again, it's been mentioned here a few times. We've seen people run building stuff without really knowing like why are we doing this. So quoting Steven Sinek, start with why. Think about what you're trying to get out, and that kind of drives what your end scenarios of data collection will be. Like if you're a B2B company tailoring to enterprises for internal stuff, collecting click streams is not likely something you want to start with. So again, like keep it in perspective and don't just go blindly collecting data.
Absolutely. I mean, one of our clients was trying to build a recommendation engine, and they ended up with 10,000 different features, and they had a difficult job trying to narrow that down into sort of 10, 20 for a machine learning model. So, and that was because they did exactly that. They collected the data, and it's like, wow, how do we do this? And luckily, they used our platform to actually do some feature extraction and basic feature engineering, automated at scale to be able on the cloud to do that. But that was definitely a pitfall of collecting too much. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do, but that's the point that you can fall into.
Yeah,
maybe recap quickly what features are in this context, because it's probably similar to what people think of on your side.
Yeah.
Sure. So things like, obviously the classic ones like demographic, age, region, kind of buying history, that type of stuff. But there were obviously all these orthogonal ones, which I won't go into detail because it's their IP, but it's, there were 10,000 of them that actually had potential set from that.
You mentioned earlier when we were speaking about having a clear objective, and I think no matter what you're building, starting with an objective is a good thing.
Absolutely.
I want to go to Scott though. So you come from a design background. And I think for me, one of the most interesting journeys that or one of the most interesting parts of the journey that I'm on with my team is actually fusing design thinking with the data science and research engineering discipline. So I obviously have my experience, but I'm curious, with your background, what is the role that you see design playing in terms of creating highly personalized experiences, where there's a lot of technical heavy lifting that's going on, but at the end of the day, you're creating an experience for consumers?
So at Babble, one of our differentiators is that every lesson that we present to learners is handcrafted by didactics experts, people who study learning and teaching. And they're actually the most curious about learner behavior. They want to know what learning paths people take, how long they spend, what they got wrong, how many things they got wrong, what they did after they finished a lesson, how long it took them before they started another lesson. You were talking about what are the pitfalls, what are the dangers, what about data? When we miss an event, when we forget to track it, because the designer, the engineer, the product manager didn't think, well, we don't really need to track everything. Well, actually, we do need to track everything because we always want to look back at that and learn more about what our learners do so we can make the experience better for them.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is bringing a human perspective and somebody that really keenly understands the patterns, the data that data represents for whatever the task it is that the customer is trying to achieve. And I mean, I'll talk a little bit about from the sizing perspective. So I have a team of 25 people, data scientists, designers, research engineers, that work on building products for size and fit. But we also have a team of 8 people on the other side of Friedrichshain that do nothing but try on shoes, dresses, tops, and jeans all day. And they create the first data set that we work with that indicates whether garments fit properly or not. And it's that, and I want to kind of segue a little bit into, it's this blended experience, and I think that's what you're talking about, is somebody, a human that actually understands what's going on by being able to look at the data, and then we couple that with all of this technology to really create a meaning for customers. So what are we seeing now? And again, we go back to to Nils and John. What kind of patterns around a blended, personalized experience are you seeing where machine and human are kind of supporting one another?
No, that's a very good question, and there's a very, very salient point, actually. I worked on a project for a particular financial services institution where we were trying to build a chatbot for an operations team, and it's very much a personalized chatbot, guiding people through deep domain kind of corpus of information. And it became very apparent very, very quickly that we couldn't do it just by doing generalized inference on the corpus. There was 10,000 documents. What we needed was actually someone who actually understood things like trading and payments and risk to actually build a taxonomy to start with, to guide the machine to be able to actually give that kind of the right information in 3 questions or less, which was basically the attention span of people actually doing that. So that accelerated that project, and we basically a previous team tried to do that, spent 6 months to do it. We did it in 6 weeks because we had that domain level. So AI machine learning is not magic where you just give it data and the machine will actually magically understand what's going on. You need that domain level on top of it, so it's a really key point.
Fabulous.
Okay.
No, and I was going to say, if you didn't have anything to add, I mean, coming back to, I want to flip the coin around. So Matteo and Caroline, how do we ensure that by using machine learning and whatever human curation, that we don't actually create a situation where our customers miss out? Where by a highly personalized experience, I complain about Spotify all the time. I'm like, why am I listening to basically the same music, different artists, but it has a very similar fingerprint from my perspective. So how do we navigate when we have, because we both deal with large assortments of consumer goods, how do we navigate shrinking the assortment so that it's relevant for customers, but also introducing and inspiring our customers and making sure that they don't miss out?
So one thing that we do, we definitely take into consideration the personalized experience, and we want to make sure that we have relevant items for you because they drive a good part of the conversions that we have. To avoid the missing out part, we introduced in the sorting and the recommendation engines some novelty. So we just introduced stuff that doesn't otherwise would be picked up to make sure that we have that variance. Because otherwise you end up with always the same kind of stuff that you don't really want to just have there. And we see that that is kind of part of the training, part of the mechanism. And without that, some items will just stay at the back of the catalog because they will not get enough views.
So I think for fashion, it's also, fashion is so personal. Fashion is really about how I want to present myself to the world. It's about who I am. It's so intimately linked with who I am as an individual. So for fashion, the challenge is also you don't want to sway too much from the style of the customer, because then they lose trust in what you're actually recommending to them. So again, coming back to what I said before, it's really about truly knowing the customer and really knowing which of the customer's preferences are the strongest. Like if you look at me here today, you can kind of guess what kind of like color scheme I usually wear. This is yeah, this is what I have been wearing every day since I was 16 years old, and that's a long time. So that means I also want to be inspired, but don't show me that pink shirt because it's totally irrelevant for me. But maybe if you show me that, that top with a bit of a cut that I wouldn't normally wear, that's where my comfort zone is in the inspiration. So it's really about knowing the products, like knowing what it is that you're kind of presenting to the customer and really knowing it, backwards and forwards and really understanding it, but then also knowing the customer. Because of course, you want to be inspired, but the inspiration that you're getting has to be relevant. So showing me a pink T-shirt, it's going to be me checking out and saying, like, bye-bye, you don't know me at all. So it's really about finding this sweet spot. And the way to do that is really to make sure that you focus on knowing the customer and your products, and then it's matchmaking.
When you say knowing the customer, like, do you just infer stuff at Zalando? You also ask a user, like, do you like pink? Or I don't like pink, don't show me ever.
So we do ask, and that's one of the things that we actually want to do more of. Because what this is really about, it's also about inviting the customer in to really, be able to shape their experience. One way that I like to talk around this is, imagine, your favorite brick and mortar store, and then the sales clerk that works there. So a really good sales clerk, they will know your style, they will know your fit, they will know what looks good on you, and all of these things. And then they will be able to help you narrow the assortment. But the way that they do this is usually also by a dialogue. They will tell you, oh, this is a bit small in size, or I think this would look really good on you. How does it feel? Is this more in the line of what you're looking for? And what we really essentially want to do, since we're talking about what the goal of personalization is, we want to be that amazing sales clerk to our customers that really know exactly what this customer likes, what looks good on them, their size, all of these things, to then be able to really present a relevant assortment. And part of that is also this inspiration thing.
It's really about building a relationship. Oh, you guys all want to talk. This is fabulous. Yay. It's really about building a relationship over time. Nils, you look like you have something that you want to add.
No, I'm just curious because like that cold start user that comes to us without knowing anything about them, we collect a lot of data passively as people opt into our services, but I'm just curious, like from your perspective, like what's that tipping point when you start, I'm not going to say bothering people, but like what's a good indicator to ask for information actively from the user and have them consent to sharing that with you?
At the start point.
Yeah.
So actually, I think, Scott, it could be really interesting. Like you're focused on creating learning environments, and that's a very personal experience. We know that there are different types and styles of learning. How do you know when to kind of interject to check in with one of the Babble users and say, like, are we engaging you around your language learning fast enough? I don't know what questions you ask, but how do you know when the sweet spot is so that you're not getting in the way, but you're able to, again, tailor the experience to meet the demands of whoever is taking the language class?
And that's exactly what we're trying to figure out right now. And we're approaching it at the micro and the macro level, at the qualitative and the quantitative level.
Sure.
So on the qualitative side, one meeting I was in the other day was about interviewing language teachers and finding out how they teach, how they assess, how they get to know a new client. I'm talking one-on-one language coaches because we want to be your personalized language coach.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, we're thinking about doing a video ethnography project in multiple countries, and we can't just do it in Germany or in one city in the US. We've got to pick and choose carefully so we can match different parts of the world and different types of learning styles. And so we can follow people around and look at their environment, ask them questions, and ask them questions before, during, and after the language learning journey that's natural. And of course, video ethnography is not going to be supernatural, but we can use tools to do self-diary study with video. Then with the analytics data, we can track what they're doing, and we can dig through the logs of what individual learners have done and collectively what groups of learners have done to determine those behaviors, make changes to the product, and see how the product performance actually differs before and after those changes are made in A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing. So all of that together paints a really complete picture and widens that aperture and enables us to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I think the qualitative and the quantitative, you can't use one without the other. You absolutely need both. That's one of the big lessons that I think we've learned and lived by here at Zalando. But I'm curious, just to follow on there, how are you currently measuring the impact of the personalization that you're doing at Babble? Like, is there some sweet metric, one KPI that you're driving, or is it, I don't know, do you have a vision for what a successful personalization learning platform will look like?
So each of us, we're looking at different metrics. We have this kind of palette of metrics that we look at, and we have to pick a metric for a project and track that so we can move it in the right direction. One of my favorites is the 7-day return. Mm-hmm. And we do it with a river plot to see who was on day 1 and made it to day 2, and who was on day 2 and made it to day 3, but who was on day 1 and made it to day 3 but skipped day 2. And the plot is really, really beautiful. The data scientist who built it really loved doing it. And it's a live plot that we can look at, and we can look at it with percentages and groups, and we can look at it in many different ways. But it's not, it can be a simple metric that we track, you know, weekly active paying users, overnight returns, but that 7-day return is really my favorite.
Interesting. Yeah, so within the context of sizing, we look at the size-related return rate, but it's not just the size-related return rate. It's the whole ecosystem around what did you keep, what did you buy 2 sizes of, and you kept 1, because for us, this is actually quite successful. So it's never just one KPI, but it's good to have a few. So John and Nils, like, do you ever work with teams where they may have an objective, but they have no way to measure it? Yeah. And do you have any advice for people that are struggling to define a KPI to really measure progress on a personalization strategy?
Sure. I mean, we always talk about personalization at the end user, but we also need personalization for people interpreting the data. And that's something that I see it fall down many, many times when a data scientist comes like, here's a nice scatter plot. And the business user says, well, what's that telling me?
Right.
You know, so I think that's something that you should never underestimate. The user experience, the interpretation, the visualization around that, and the personalization for that particular audience. So your line of business person will be different from your CXO, or from your operations person, or from your data scientist. So I think that's definitely a key learning, that when you actually come up with an objective, understand who the audience is, understand how you can present the data, and that's classic kind of design and user experience and personalization.
Yeah, we have a setup in my team. We've got data scientists and business analysts working next to each other. And it's the business analyst that often takes the data and says, here's the narrative that we're going to put together in a slide deck to go work with the sales teams. And he knows exactly how it needs to be presented, where the data scientist just wouldn't have that kind of, I want to say nuanced view, but it's not a nuanced view. It's just another persona. Absolutely, it's another deliverable. Yeah, so Nils, do you have any other sort of best practices in terms of KPIs that teams can start with?
Just to follow up on that, like,
sure.
This is not a new thing. Like, we had that same discussion 15 years ago when we talked about business intelligence.
Yes.
Even back then, it all drove back to, like, what is the business trying to achieve? So I don't have any magic tricks here. Like, this is what you should be looking for. And like for us, of course, like most of our services are customer facing. So typically, like on the Google side, it is fairly easy for us to measure stuff. The results are certainly interesting if you look at, for example, YouTube as a consumer-facing example from Google, where just by the personalization available on the homepage, we now have 70% of all videos on YouTube people find via the homepage. and spend 20 times as much using the recommendations we give rather than just finding stuff or getting stuff shared with them. So again, like think of the business impacts or the business implications of what you're looking for. It sounds trivial, but that's like the only recommendation I could give you right now.
Fabulous.
There's another example where I've worked with an operations team where we built a wonderful user experience, a day in the life of an operations person, went through a user persona kind of driven journey, and they still wanted to export to Excel. So don't underestimate also the change that your organization may need to go through to be data driven as well. That's another key point. Actually,
I do have one magical word of advice. If you're doing day in the life scenarios, my old boss used to say, give me 3 months and I'll show you a day in the life. So like that type of scenario where you're thinking mostly about how to set stuff up, and at the end you have this glorious result of the report that you want to present. That's certainly not the right way of going about it, because A, it will make your data and results seem more complicated than they need to be, and you're going about it all backwards. Like start with the outcome, show the pretty result first, even if it's just a mock-up, and then work backwards on how to actually grade that data, collect that data, rather than starting with the data and then working towards a result that might or might not work for you.
That's a good point, because in 3 months the business might change as well, right? You need a new model and you bring new data in, so it's got to be fast track.
So we talk a little bit about how we work with results internally. Let's talk a little bit about organizational setup. So Matteo, Wayfair is a company that is split across continents and across cultures. What have you guys learned about setting up your organization to create personalized experiences?
So our main headquarters are in Boston, and the company was born 12 years ago, and historically is an American company. So most of the R&D comes out of that. In the last 2-3 years, we've been investing a lot in Berlin. Now we have more than 700 people. So we are a decently sized company by now, but we still see a lot of differences from a cultural point of view. And one of the main challenges has really been getting people in the US to think about the company as an international entity and not just something for the US market. And so that's something that I've been through personally, because I've been focusing on the international markets as the first part of my journey within Wayfair. That meant working on Canada, UK, and Germany to launch localized features for those markets. And we really noticed that that brought a lack of ownership on the product side in the US. And that's something we decided to move away, and we wanted to give more ownership to the actual teams in Boston to make sure that they are accountable for that as well. And that makes one of the ways to get to that point was really to empower teams with data, make sure that they had a clear understanding of what the outcome and the potential outcome of their work could have been on international markets. And on personalization in particular, we definitely noticed that it's easier to work with larger set of data, and what we have in the US, where the market is much more mature, it's much more established, it's easier to do that. It's easier, we can do it in a different way. And translating that into the German market that is still at its infancy was really posing a challenge. So we had to take a step back and say, okay, how do we approach this? How do we find different ways to tackle this problem? So that was definitely one of the interesting challenges that we had. Still not solved entirely, but yeah.
One of the fascinating things about Babble that is a little known fact, but Babble's a German company based here in Berlin, and our international market is the US. So we opened up a New York office several years ago, and we've had to figure out how to market our product to Americans. Now, as an American expat, I've been away for a long time. Yeah. So my data, my personal experience isn't entirely relevant anymore because I've lived here for a while. But our New York office, I mean, they create different advertising, different landing page, but they still have to market the same product. And it's super fascinating to find out how it works on the other side. And having the home office here in Berlin and the international office in the US, really interesting results. And it's working really well for us.
So do you have a distributed personalization team, or is personalization just part of what every team does?
Well, there's a little bit of a story behind that. We, for user research, That team was based here in Berlin for a long time. And Babble sells really, really, really well in Germany. And the brand recognition is really high. But we were doing all of our research in Berlin, in German, mostly on Germans, because the team was German. And it made a lot of sense. Of course, Babble's, the language in the office is always English. But it was easier for them to do that. I opened up a research team in New York, and features are iterating, and things are changing quite a lot. And now almost all of our research is done in the United States. And we're in New York City and Manhattan, so we don't do the research in person anymore. We do almost all of it remote, which is in a way better because we don't have to get the people to show up to the office, and we get, you know, devices now have cameras built into them, so they don't have awkward setups, and we're able to do a full recording session, do the interview live, even though it's done remotely. And the team in Berlin can watch live as well. So we're seeing incredible results from that effort. And now we're finally bringing research back to Germany because we want to actually create some products here for the German market as well.
Fabulous. And Caroline, and for Zalando, we have 16, 17 countries now with the Czech Republic and Ireland.
I think so.
How do we approach personalization so that as we talked about, and it's been touched on, the different regions have different needs. What is this? How do you see the setup playing into that here at Zalando?
So, well, we have the same thing. We're based in Berlin, but we're operating in a lot of different markets. So one thing that Zalando realized pretty early on was you kind of need to have local expertise in order to actually be able to do business in these markets. So that is something that we have ensured, that we actually have local expertise, and within the local market teams, we actually have people that are experts on, you know, the fashion aspect of that market. And we are, of course, trying to work very closely with these people and use them really as what they are, experts that can give us guidance, because the point of personalization is that it's also very much a local affair. I mean, I'm from Sweden, I've lived here for a really long time, but still I can kind of like identify much more with the Swedish kind of Scandinavian style than I can with the German. And that is true for the majority of our customers as well, that you need to give this local experience, and in order to actually truly be able to do that, you need to also have local expertise. You have to have people that know this market. And also, when we're talking about user research, we're, of course, same situation as you, facing the exact same issues. User research, hello Berlin and Germans, what do you like about fashion? And they are not representative for all of Europe, obviously. Italy. So, yeah, exactly. Like, you think someone from Milan would be like, yeah, that's exactly right. No, so what we do, we go to the local markets, and we have actually this qualitative research happening in the local markets, and we ensure that we actually not only focus everything we do on Berlin and Germans, but we actually go to France, Sweden, Italy, and talk to customers there to really understand what their needs are and what they want from Zalando.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned recently is there's a huge difference, and it's not just regional, it's also scale. When you're talking about customers living in an urban environment as opposed to people living in smaller towns, it's anything that's personal is going to have a different narrative attached to it. Yeah. So I want to switch topics and focus on something that many of us have spent a lot of time cursing over. GDPR, WTF. Who in this room has been plagued with GDPR work? Yeah, so we're all feeling it. Let's start out with something a little bit more optimistic, potentially, depending on your answers. So what do we believe, or what do we see so far are the opportunities with GDPR? And I'll take any answer.
I have to say that I actually, like, everyone's like, oh, GDPR is such a pain in the ass. But, and yes, it definitely is. But it's also like, we can also look at it as an opportunity, because it actually is also giving a little bit like of power back to the end consumer. Because what we're saying is actually that the end consumer should be in control of their data. And, you know, we as tech companies, we're thinking that's such a pain in the ass, it's annoying. It doesn't have to be, because what we can actually potentially, the opportunity to engage then with our customers and tell them, what are we doing with your data? What are we offering you in return? And it puts us in a position where we really have to offer something in return, because otherwise customers are going to say, you're not getting my data, and we want their data. So we can also see it as a huge opportunity for us to actually really inform customers. We're going to be using it for this. This is what you're going to get in return. So it's a much more transparent kind of contract that we're actually writing with our customers. So from that perspective, I think it's a really, really good thing.
Absolutely.
So, Nils, you're champing at the bit.
Am I? No. Actually, I just wanted to take the chance to link that comment back to our previous topic, internationalization. So a counterpoint to spreading research out across regions. Yes, you need that, but when it comes to privacy and data controls, actually, we do most of our R&D around that here in Germany. Can you imagine why? Because we found that a lot of the, if it works in Germany, it pretty much works everywhere else. I'm generalizing here, totally. But that has certainly helped. But also to the big word that comes with GDPR for me is consent, and that has allowed us to do things more relaxed, because we know we're not working around the customer. We're very open to them what data we're collecting. And same as you, we found out like it's not that the main concern is how much data is being collected, but what's being done with it.
Right.
And just to finish that off, it's allowed a lot of our advertising customers to take a step back from actually that micro personalization when it comes to running ads, and actually do more context-based advertising, because it seems like a safer way to do stuff instead of targeting individual users. Target like where's the user currently interacting, and the results were actually quite surprising that we haven't seen a significant drop in conversion rates as people scale back like hyper personalized ads towards more contextual advertising.
Sure. Just to link that, I did a proof of concept where I actually had a chatbot doing the consent on a user portal. So basically, we were linking together data around what the user was doing, saying actually we could save you this much money if you actually click on this, and guide them through exactly what we're going to do it through the chatbot interface. And actually, that went down very, very well. Obviously, there were some challenges with the organisation gathering the data, but it actually showed that real personalisation and gives GDPR an opportunity to actually make money and actually save the customer money at the same time.
The silver lining. Matteo, what about you from the payment side? What are you seeing are advantages or disadvantages with having to be GDPR compliant?
Honestly, there is not too much of an impact for us specifically. The main point is that we really have to be compliant and make sure that customers are informed. That's mostly for the marketing side. On the payment side, I think we're not too touched on that. At least not yet, because we don't do crazy customizations.
Sure.
That's something that might change in the future, but it's definitely one of the things to account for. Depending on the companies you work with, they also have their own privacy policy. For example, we work with Klarna. They have their own agreements, and customers have to agree to have their SHUFA run when you want to go through a credit check. So if you want to use those services, and especially when there is a credit check, privacy and data collection is something that you have to take very seriously. And financing in general is one of those things where you have to respect a lot of regulations. So it's not something new that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's basically a right to play, isn't it? The GDPR set the bar quite high.
Yeah.
So on the personal side, I'm getting a lot less spam.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
So I've noticed an immediate change. And some of them are like, are you kidding? Why are you still sending me this crap? But on the other side, we're noticing that more and more of our learners really want to stay in touch with us. They want us to be in touch with them and let them know what's coming up and what's happening, and to help them with language tips and things like that. So it hasn't been all bad. But it has been a lot of hard work.
But it has always been like that with email marketing. Like you can't just expect to buy a mailing list or to just subscribe everybody to your newsletter and just obtain good results. You want to engage with people. You want to get the right ones subscribed, and because they are going to be generally interested. And if you just email everybody, that's not going to fly.
Yeah, I think what Scott is saying is that what GDPR has done is it's created a lot more an explicit contract between those of us providing a service and our customers, and it's a real level setting in terms of expectations. So in terms of expectations and relationships, before we turn it over to some questions from our audience here, what are some of the most exciting opportunities? We opened with this, we got a little bit, but I want to come back because I think personalization is exciting. I think it is a journey. There are pitfalls along the way, but what do you wish for, either for the companies that you're currently working with, the consumer experiences or customer experiences you're providing, or for yourself? Like, who's got a fantasy personalization outcome that they think would be great?
I want a personal language coach who's going to get me to learn German faster.
Me too. Me too. Okay. All right.
So we have two things that are very interesting, and it's not just a dream, it's something that is just waiting to happen. One is the recommendation of the actual products that you have, and that's kind of information that we already have. We know what sofa you might want to buy, what style. That can be combined with the 3D renderings that we have been working on, and that helps us to guide the environmental shooting that we do. And if you combine the two things, you know, this guy likes rustic and is viewing something that we can combine. We can just show them the right imagery that is tailored to them. And obviously that requires investment, but that brings the right personalization in touch with you. And the other part is on the design services. Like something that we're building for the US is a tool to give interior designers kind of democratize the service. Yeah. That's something that nowadays you might not want to do it because it's too expensive or you don't really care about. And we are building a service that gets in contact interior designers with actual customers. And that's for now is one-to-one recommendation between a user and another person. But the next point is likely going to be some kind of a recommendation that ingests your taste and spits out something that you are going to be much more likely to buy because it's a set of items in an environment that fits your actual needs. So.
Sure, I think.
Just building on what you said, because seriously, like that got me thinking, and like going even maybe further into the future, but definitely much bolder and very much my own personal opinion. This is something you and I have talked about as well, Stacia. Like, if we think about personalization, the interesting thing, and this, I'm quoting you now, like how technology can actually bring us back to how things were before the Industrial Revolution. What do I mean by that? Back then, clothes were sewn to measure. With technology, we could, and not that far into the future, have tailor-made clothes. And that would be, of course, amazing because the fit would be better. But just think of the sustainability wins. And that's what I think is really exciting, that technology allows us to actually be more personal, but also much more sustainable. Because if that jacket that I want is tailor-made to me, and it's only made when I order it, then no more waste. And we can also personalize the whole supply chain there. I can say, I don't actually care if I get it in 2 weeks, as long as you can make sure that you send it with, I don't know, a train, so that it doesn't pollute the environment. So the thing is, my thing about personalization and why I think it's so exciting is because, and it's the same with GDPR, it gives us as consumers a much more influence to actually put pressure on the topics that we think are important, and to really be able to get a truly personalized experience that is also, environmentally friendly, that is, diverse, inclusive, where, people are not being exploited, where we're not kind of just, duplicating stupid gender norms, like all of these things. And this is the opportunity that we actually have in this bold new future.
Unraveling potential.
Absolutely. I guess the vision I have is actually something that we're doing. We do a lot of work in health and life sciences around genome sequencing. And health and life sciences companies actually use our platform to take what used to take months and weeks down to days, where they have clinical trials based on user profiling of their genome to actually do drug trials. And my vision is actually someone's going to cure cancer on our platform, and that's something that would make me really proud.
That's really exciting and very inspirational. Nice. Nils, you work with a lot of different teams. What do you find most inspirational, or what do you see out on the horizon that gets you up out of bed every day?
Good. Actually, I should get you in touch with a lot of my customers who are car manufacturers because they solved that problem of having batch size 1 for everything. But joking aside, like for me, my wishes are much more humble. I work a lot with enterprise customers, and the level of personalization and user experience you guys build on the consumer side. If you go to most large enterprises, we're back in the late 90s when it comes to user experience. So that like Google mission statement of collecting and organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful, to do a tiny part of that for enterprise employees, to have something like Google Now or Alexa, what's my day look like, for somebody who actually gets that information at work. That's my little dream that I've been working on since starting with Lotus Notes in the 90s. So we'll revisit that in a couple of years, see where we are.
Very cool. All right, so now I would like to open up for questions from the audience, and I need to grab this box over here. Can somebody also tell me how we're doing on time? We can stay here all night. Okay. So, and you guys are still here. So, yes, we're going to throw this, and I'm going to try not to hit you.
Hey.
Hi. So I saw like a conversation goes around like when you already have the data and how you can personalize and how you can offer to your customers like different solutions and everything. Just kind of a bit of context here. So I work for like a company that is for a streetwear brand that we want to use data. We wanted to collect data in the beginning, not only for like provide better service and everything, but for build a community around our clients. Not only like to see like how many people buy these kind of sneakers or hats, but more about kind of like how we can bring everyone together or something like this. So we collected some data, and then we successful kind of like start to offer better more customized website. Not only website, but also like we start with the data, kind of change our collections, like how we design our collections based on the data that we get. And then we figure out at some point when came the restrictions of data that, okay, we actually to collect this data, we get like content. We start to provide content, relevant content for our customers. And then now we are trying to find a way like, okay, we already have data, but how can we create interesting ways or relevant ways for these people or our customers give the data, give data for us. For example, the question is like, what kind of technologies that can inspire the customers to give relevant data to the companies?
John, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I guess the sort of biggest explosion we've seen in that from our company's perspective is called kind of IoT. Explosion of wearable tech. Hands up here who's got an iPhone? Do you know? Yeah, most of the room. The iPhone, I mean, the Android may have it as well. I have an iPhone, but it has a health application which tracks how much you walk. And I use that all the time. It comes free. So that's actually collecting data. Again, there's maybe some GDPR issues around that, but fundamentally it's collecting data, and that's really, really useful. I didn't even know it was actually part of the application. So it's stuff like that that really actually helps. I can say, I can tell my wife I'm walking 7 kilometers a day, and I don't need to. I can have chips for dinner, so stuff like that. So, which actually, but that, I mean, being flippant, but it's actually those sort of got really easy, the low frictionness of actually using applications to track that kind of data at the edge in personal devices. That's something we're seeing in a massive adoption rate around that.
Yes. This is going to be fun.
I just have this question where you are very privileged that you have a lot of data to process, and that you are now at the moment that you started getting more and more. If you would figuratively reset all the data, how would you start doing that as a business again? And where would you start? And what types of data would be interesting for a small startup to collect?
Scott, do you want to start? I see the wheels.
If we were
Everybody's
going to
turning.
start collecting data all over again, what would we collect? We'd ask more questions up front. And so I've got to answer that question, not just what's the data that we would collect, but what would we do immediately to reward the people who give us that data. So we ask them what they want to learn and why, and then give them what they want to learn when they want to learn it, and give them the opportunity to answer that question again to change their learning experience. But in terms of tracking, I mentioned it before, we want to track everything they do while they're using our app. We really don't want to track where they're going or what they're having for dinner or use their camera when they're not expecting it or listen in when they don't want us to be listening in. That's not what Babble's about, but we want to make that learning experience better for them.
So it's also really about knowing what the right questions are to ask. Yeah?
And we're going to keep asking questions, and we're going to get them wrong a lot of the time. One of our company values is that we're a learning company. And we take that really, really seriously. We learn every day from our learners, from each other, and from making mistakes. And making mistakes is part of the Babble culture. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to learn from them, and then maybe make different mistakes next time.
I think also for those of you that are just starting out working with data sets, no matter how large or small, we talked about this before you joined us, that having a mindset around experimentation is really critical because you can't assume what the data is going to tell you. You have to work with it and learn what the data can tell you, and that's a process, and everybody's nodding their heads saying yes.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Oh, wow. Okay, I want to start in the back, but and then I'm going to come down, but I'm not going to throw this at you because that would be really awesome, but I can't do it today.
I love this squishy microphone. It's a great
It's
idea.
really cool.
And then it stops working.
One impact too
Maybe
many.
it only works if you throw it.
Okay, tell me the question, and I will. Maybe we broke it. I don't know. Oh, I love this question. So how important is it to put people into boxes in order to achieve personalization?
I would say not at all, but that's so the thing is, like, of course, you need to group things in order to kind of understand them because that's how our human brain works. We need to kind of categorize, and we need to be like us versus them and everything. But I don't think it's necessarily about grouping. It's about pairing. So it really is about that, like. You have Stacia there, you have T-shirt there. So does that T-shirt, should that be paired with Stacia? It's not more, it's much more about that than about who else here is like Stacia. And that is really how to think about it, not necessarily grouping, because then you're more talking about segmentation. Personalization is on a much more kind of matching level. I don't know if anyone has a different opinion.
Anyone else want to?
I think personalization isn't about putting people in boxes. I think it's about literally personalization.
Yeah, taking them out of the box.
All right, we're going to get one more hand mic. And then I really have to run up and down the stairs. Okay, so I had somebody in the middle, and then I promise I'll get to you. Who here? You got a question.
I heard you talking a lot about personalization and also about localization. And I was wondering, what is like the biggest difference you see between markets, and then especially European markets and American markets?
So I can take that one. As I said before, like especially for the stuff that I work on payments, you really see a big difference between what the US people do and what Germans. But also the other countries. Like you definitely see a much higher adoption of credit cards in the US, and also a different usage of credit cards in that market versus in Europe. And that's due to the cultural differences that you have. But then you also have, obviously, different tastes on a country level. You're not going to have the same kind of taste in the Scandinavian countries versus in Mediterranean ones if you're talking about dressing. So that's definitely something that is important to think about. Like localization, you're going to be tailoring the experience because you know that a given user belongs to a given culture and they identify with that. And there is a correlation between the two things.
One of the things that we've found is that Americans really need a lot more encouragement, and they need the experience, the pros, to be much more excited. The latest experience was this lesson end page. When you do a lesson in Babble, the last page tells you the score that you got, how many you got right and how many you got wrong. And we wanted to experiment with a phrase in the learning language. And we went through many iterations. I'm going to give a whole talk on this pretty soon. But the first thing we did was we put stars on there. If you got them all right, you got 3 stars. That's 3. If you got only a couple right, you got 1 out of 3 stars. And we showed the blank stars that they didn't get. And when we did the user testing in the US, people were like, why are you punishing me for getting this wrong? And I think one of the phrases that we put on there was like, you can do better. It was so terrible. I think the quote on the usability video was, I feel like I've just been slapped in the face. Brilliant. So yeah, we had to change it. But the Germans, they were fine with it.
Yeah. I think it's also, and it's also about the assortment, right? And it's the same. Like it's really about the selection you put in front of the customer. That's really where the localization aspect comes in there. I mean, again, looking at the region where I'm from and looking at fashion, there are certain brands that just don't work because they're too colorful, they're too busy. And this is what we look like up north. So flowers, no. And that's kind of the thing. It's the same, I think, with the payments. Like, what do you actually put in front of the customer? And that's the localized aspect. And then, then it's about the matchmaking.
But also, like a little counterpoint to your part, like when we did experience in the past, especially between Europe, Central Europe, and the US, I would summarize it, Americans see potential, Germans especially see problems. Oh, yes. So if you're trying stuff out, and the Americans will say like, yeah, this is kind of cool, this recommendation, I can kind of live with that, I can see the potential. The Germans will say, das ist totaler Mist, I don't want this. So again, like the road to perfection is a bit longer in Germany in general. It's
about understanding. I used to work, before I worked at Zalando, I used to work at eBay, which is also, an American company. My role was to kind of drive international projects in Europe. The most common comment I heard from my American colleagues was about the Germans. Why are they so negative? Why aren't they excited about this? What is it that they think is going to be problematic? And I was just like, you have to understand that, where you see, yeah, we have a great potential, they see, oh, and all of these problems could occur. Yes. And it's really about understanding the culture that you're operating in.
So I think you had a question, yes? Okay.
Hello. Thank you very much for your insights. I think they are most valuable. And I had a question for Caroline. When you were talking about the mistakes you had made, I think you mentioned 2 things. One of them was that you had to be very careful in picking up what the data that you considered should represent your 360-degree vision of your customer. And the second one, I understood that was that you had to understand why your customer was doing what she was doing. So my question for you is, how did you or do you approach that understanding of your customer's behavior?
That's a really, really great question, and we do it in a number of ways. One is, of course, to just test and see, okay, what do we see if we weigh this kind of input more than that? What's the outcome? But then it's also, as we've talked about on the panel here, it's really about looking at the quantitative data and also doing qualitative research, and then also really trying by observing and by initially starting these dialogues with the customers and so on. And it's super difficult. It really is difficult because every time a customer comes to Zalando, we don't know why are you there. Are you there because you just want to, you're sitting on the tram on the way home and you just want to browse through a few things? Or are you there because you really, really want to buy this particular item? And that is something that we have to figure out. So it's really complicated and it's really tricky. And, we, of course, I don't think anyone in the industry has actually solved it and has, the holy grail. We understand everything. But it really is this dedication to constantly trying to understand the data and understand it better. And really then see, okay, what should we weigh more or less? And if a customer explicitly tells us, I hate this brand, then maybe that's something we should take very seriously, rather than taking the click where they looked at that funny-looking hat. So it's really about just really constantly observing.
So we have another question back here.
So I wanted to ask because, towards the end of the conversation, it's with personalization, we try to make the best match. So it's all about the good match, the best match, customer, what they want to get. So what would you say, what is the formula? What are the ingredients, or what could you share? What works for doing a good match?
So, so good match. It's when we can, in our case, it's when we can delight our customers. How do we measure if we delight our customers? It's like we were talking about. It's different KPIs because, again, it goes back to why is the customer there? If you're only there because you actually want to, browse a few things, you want to get some inspiration, you're thinking about buying a birthday gift for your mother, and you just want to see what's out there, then your mission is accomplished once you have seen, those 4 sweaters that you were actually, thinking of buying. But if your mission is that you want that particular pair of sneakers in that particular color and you want them in that particular size, then that's when your mission is accomplished. So that's why it's hard to say, how do we measure it? Yeah, well, you have to, again, look at this holistically and look at different KPIs. Because not every session for us should end in a conversion. Because if customers only come when they want to buy something, then that's not really a relationship. You really want to kind of serve the customer for what they need right now.
So for us, it's definitely personalization. One of the goals is to make the experience as magical as possible. That's the kind of end mission that you want to achieve. Then you always have the pitfall of ending up in the creepiness side. Yeah. That's probably more the Facebook kind of situation where, what is this ad? Right, why do you know this about me? That's kind of the trade-off that you have to make, and making sure that you can deliver something that the customer doesn't really expect. And it's like, well, that you really know me, and I'm only going to shop at Wayfair from now on. But okay, that's too much. Yeah. So balancing the two things, and a way to understand if you're doing it in the right way could be NPS. You could understand that it's only one of the metrics that you can look at, but it can give you an idea of the direction that you're going. Are you doing the right things? Are you creating a platform, an ecosystem that is giving customers what they want, what they expect, and that they would tell other people about?
Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do the opposite of a gym. Gym, they want you to buy that membership, and they don't care if you come again. Yeah. I mean, we want our learners to come back again and again and again. And we learned something a while ago. We actually removed PayPal as a payment method. And we did that. There were some technical reasons, some business reasons. The only people who were really using PayPal were sleepers anyway. They were those people who paid for it and weren't learning. And the funny thing is we took PayPal out, and we notified them, and then we actually got a lot of angry calls from them to customer service, why'd you take my Babble away? I still want it. Even though I'm not using it, I want it to be there so that I can use it. And fortunately, we were able to convert them to other payment methods. But that was a nice lesson we learned. We learned the opposite lesson when we took away a feature where users could add their own words to their vocabulary so they could use Babble as like a flashcards mechanism. And they were angry. They were really, really, really angry because we took a feature away that they were using. And we had used the analytics data to find out, hey, it was only used by a few thousand people out of more than 1 million paying subscribers. So maybe that feature's not so important, but those few thousand people were our brand ambassadors. Mm-hmm. And they cared more than anybody else about Babble. And they were telling people about how great Babble was. and we took a little bit of the shine off of the product for them.
Have you thought about bringing it back?
We've got to bring it back, and we've got to make it better.
Cool, very cool. More questions from the audience. We have loads of time, so yes.
I actually just first had a comment going back to the American versus German, and positive versus negative. Or I used to work on personalization at eBay. When we did that, it actually comes down to trust. It's not positive versus negative, it's trust, right? To earn a German's trust in e-commerce is a high threshold to be met, whereas a North American or British is much lower. So I think that's the better way to view it. And it's faster to lose it as well. And messaging is so important in Germany on the trust. We went through the same thing. Our ads had the wrong communication. So, but once we changed it, it was very different. For the question, though, we talk about personalization. We start off with browsing, there's searching, then there's personalization. What about curation? And maybe there's a question for Zalando, right? Is that the next step, or is that a parallel step?
It's a parallel step. Because the thing is, like, the human touch is I don't think you can replace the human touch ever. So that's kind of what we also have talked about, and we talked quite a lot about it before we actually came on here, that the human touch, it will always be needed. And be that then as an input to all of this fancy machine learning and AI that we're doing, or be it very concretely that you may want to actually have a humanly curated collection, because it's just something that some customers will be really interested in, because you just want to have someone else's input and inspiration. So it's very much parallel. One does not kind of stand in contrast with the other. And that is also the point of personalization, to actually allow or provide everyone with a personal experience, meaning what is personally relevant for them. Because for someone, maybe influencers are super relevant, and that's kind of how you get your fashion advice. And for others, that is completely uninteresting, and that's a distraction. So it really is about being able to offer a wide array of experiences, and if that is algorithmically generated things or manually created things, curated things, both are very much needed.
So John, working out of Databricks, what are you seeing? What kind of trends are you seeing between the sort of curation and then full machine learning? Is it a mix?
Sure. No, it's a very good point. I think it's definitely a mix. I think again, we see people on the journey, and I've talked about it before, where people start doing machine learning and expect magic to happen. And we all know, people who've been through that journey, the bit of defeat around that doesn't happen. So it's a combination of basically trying out, especially small bits of machine learning, curating your data, curating the outcomes around that, right. Identifying what works, what doesn't, using qualitative aspects of that as well. It's a combination of things around that. So, and you're going to be on that journey. I think one of the gentlemen asked around, how do I measure? Well, you might not know what you measure when you start off, but the thing is, if you fail fast and you constantly experiment, you'll find out what you measure over time. You'll find out what your objectives are and how to actually get to that point. And it's very much an iterative, experimental kind of piece. But you definitely need all three.
More questions? Yes. To her, please.
I just wanted to ask if this applies to all of you, that first you have the data and then you try to find out things from the data, or first you have a question and then you design the user experience to find what you want.
I think we may have a disagreement.
Need to be honest.
We kind of go at it from every which way. We're designing new products based on the experience of the existing product, some business objectives, some dreaming, and then as we build a new product, we're tracking the analytics, and then we're iterating really rapidly based on the results. One of the things we're comparing is we call it lesson 1 completion rate. So in Babble, the first lesson is free. We want to find out how many people who start a lesson finish it proportionally, and so in the new product, we want to get that proportion higher. So that's a marketing thing that we're trying to solve, but we're also, in that marketing problem that we're solving, understanding the user engagement of the learning model. But we're doing it with qualitative, quantitative, asking questions up front, asking questions afterward, making changes to the product, doing it all over again, and questioning each other and ourselves, hey, how can we do this better? How can we deliver a better learning experience?
An interesting exercise that I do with the teams when I start, let's say, a new project, is to really sit together and think about what kind of questions do you have about what users might want to do or about what is missing, like dumping down every kind of questions that you might want to have, and then go back and see, okay, do we have data for this? Are we missing something else? And really try to understand what are your priorities, what is going to help you to drive a decision for the product that you're building, if you're building a digital product, and prioritize those questions and getting those answers. And if you need to add tracking, spend time to do that. If you need to collect some additional data, spend that time, because that's just valuable information that you're going to have.
Yeah.
And it's good to do it at the beginning. Yeah.
But it's not a one-off thing. Like at some point, you're going to realize, okay, we're missing data. We're going to start collecting it. Or much more seldom is that like we cannot collect that data anymore for legal or regulatory reasons. But it's not a one-off. Like you're not going to start with like having your complete vision laid out and then build it, unless you're super lucky, I guess.
Sometimes when you just start getting data, you figure things out and you get excited because you say, oh, fuck, that's a pattern that I didn't recognize. And that sparkles some creativity, some new ideas that you didn't really think about before, just because the data are in your face.
Yeah, and it's also this, like, I think this iterative process, because also we live in a world that is constantly changing. So even if something was true yesterday, it's not going to be true tomorrow. So it's really about having this curious mindset, which is also, I think, what everyone here is talking about, like using qualitative, quantitative, being curious, really identifying what is my hypothesis, and then not kind of jumping to conclusions, but really then looking at, okay, so this was my hypothesis, but the data tells me that I was wrong, I was dead wrong, and then you kind of just have to accept, okay, then what does it tell me instead?
Absolutely, and it's also really important to have sort of tooling that allows you to do that. I've worked with a lot of data scientists who basically, they get that iteration, which is really, really important, can take 6 months. So you need to be able to do that within days, sometimes even hours, and having the infrastructure and tooling to be able to actually do that is absolutely vital to be able to have that experimentation.
More questions? Yes.
What do you say?
I have a very specific question. Like you were talking about personalization, but then if you have like a customer, for example, interior designer that's choosing like furniture, or if you have like someone who's working with style and buying for someone else, then how this personalization works, because this person actually is getting the style from others, it's not like their own style.
Yeah, that's definitely a tricky one. Even for Zalando, if you're buying for someone else, you screw up with the algorithms. And it's hard to know that unless you really ask the customer, or you have a very good way to infer that, hey, this is not the usual pattern that you're normally exhibiting. But that's definitely one of the challenges that you have with personalization.
You mentioned a very easy workaround to figuring that out earlier, right?
IP.
Talking to people, And I mean, that would probably be the best way to avoid this, is to actually ask, are you, shopping for yourself? Are you, or I mean, there's another company that has, solved it in a different way, Netflix, who's watching. So it could be also, I mean, we all know that online accounts, a lot of times it's not just one person, it's several people. So who's shopping? And if you are then an interior designer, it could even be, who are you shopping for? So, but really, this kind of, engaging in the dialogue, it's usually the best way. In any type of interaction, it's like, ask, because then you will find out. And it's, true for humans, it's true for computers, it's true for everything, to really be explicit about these things.
You might not ask at the beginning, but you will
while,
probably recognize some patterns. And you see, for example, an interior designer is going to have hundreds of addresses saved in their address book because they buy for the clients. And that's something that you can then flip back and say, okay, we noticed this pattern. We know that this user and people that exhibit this kind of behavior will likely behave in this way. And you can tailor the experience according to their needs and changing the UX of the product accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, if I start looking for pink clothes, then Zalando should really ask, are you really
mad?
shopping? Yeah, exactly. Have you gone crazy? No, are you shopping for someone else? Because it's really about detecting these patterns, and that's also where then technology can allow us to do that.
Fabulous. More from the audience. Pass it all the way down.
Thank you. More than asking, are you currently also experimenting with new technologies like 3D body scans and with new smartphones and stuff like this? And if yes, what is the current status and the challenges?
Yes. So that's my team. We are. So my wish is actually that I have to ask you for as little information as possible. I think 3D body scanning is super interesting, and we are experimenting with it. But I also think working with two-dimensional images, i.e. a selfie, and computer vision can be just as powerful. And so for us, it's really figuring out how do we extract the most amount of data without intruding upon a customer's experience. Although we're also playing with, people are excited about 3D. They're excited about depth sensor technology in their phones, and they're excited about getting clothes that fit them. So you have to think about what do people want to do, what will people really do, and then for us, the quality of that data is critical. So when you put an experience in front of a customer, like measuring your body, what is going to be foolproof? Because most of us don't actually know how to do it. So that's where we are in the journey. It's actually a very exciting time. So that's a great question. I don't know if any of...
We also have something similar that we see in the future, because obviously we're not there yet on the technology side, on the consumer side. There is technology existing that allows you, for example, to scan a room and sends me back the exact 3D representation of that. It's not yet in your phone. What you can do today is get the 3D items in augmented reality. If you think about what will be in the future, let's say you capture in 3D the entire room, you send it back to Wayfair. There is an interior designer that picks up the items and selects the 3 or 4 arrangements for you, sends them back, you look at them in virtual reality, you choose something, okay, done. That's really transformative in terms of the way you experience the product and you shop. We're not there yet, but we're building all the different pieces of the experience that will lead us into that point. And that's one of the most challenging and interesting things that you can definitely see in this space happening.
I think just on that, we've actually got a use case of customers using actually in production where they've got it's not a retail use case, but they've got telegraph poles and maintenance around them. It's actually very dangerous and very costly work. And they've built an augmented reality solution on our platform where a van follows a drone on top of the telegraph pole. The drone actually then photographs and captures images around the telegraph equipment on top of it. And then someone inside the van has an augmented reality headset on, and it explodes out the part in it, and they can actually see if it needs maintenance or not. And that's actually running in production as well. So I think there's still got a way to go, but that's actually a real life example of this kind of technology.
What about when we think about learning environments? Are any of the augmented reality, 3D, are any of these things potential enhancements, or is it more hype, do you think, Scott?
There are learning products now that use augmented reality. But one of the technologies that I'm kind of interested in is, well, there are two. One is voice only, like a hands-free product that we're already working on designing. And then the other thing is like the technology of auto-translate. How can we use that in language learning? So both of those are interesting to us. Not immediately, but to have a horizon of products that will come out,
right.
It's interesting.
Cool. Yes.
Thank you very much. My question is more like a people question or leadership question. How do you make sure that the conclusions you make, the conclusions you derive out of the data analysis are not in support of some business needs or business prospects? Because there is a saying, if you torture the data enough, it's going to confess. So my question is, how do you set it in a team so you actually learn from the data as much as possible?
So I'd probably take those, having worked with a lot of data science teams. I mean, you're absolutely right. And in machine learning and the AI terms, sort of bias and skew, and these things in the data were actually and spurious correlation are techniques that you have to teach them actually to find data scientists to actually understand when that looks like, understand their data sets as well, and understand if there's actually their data sets have enough statistical points in it, enough kind of information to actually be able to understand if you are looking at those things, and also just question the results. Sometimes you see a probability score. Oh, didn't know that. So actually, is that right? So it's actually building that kind of questioning into the teams and through data science techniques for actually looking at when identifying skew and bias and those sorts of things as well.
Thank you very much. And I assume it's from the beginning, right? The setting is like, even when you start planning the business experiment, then you start with a question and then it follows up all the way through, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And not just also when you put it into production, it's when, because models will change, data will change, and you'll get drift on the models themselves as well. So you need to understand when that happens, and you have to retrain your model. You need to understand if the model is still appropriate. When there's new data coming, you might need to change it. So you're constantly using these models to drive your business, and it's a constant thing.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and then we can go to cocktails. And I think there's still some snacks back there. So with that dangling in front of you,